First, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for being here. Despite what people, and the fact of you being here demonstrates one thing very, very clearly, which is despite what people read, Devon and Torquay are open for business. And by the way, nobody should ever underestimate the determination of UKIP members and supporters. So thank you very much. We've heard just now from Keith Crawford, Dr. Bob Smith, Tony McIntyre, Gwaine Towler, and Dr. Julia Reid. And I do want to say that I am honoured to be their colleague. And let's hope all 5 get elected in May. I particularly want to give a special mention to Dr. Julia Reid. Julia is the highest ranked candidate, and there was no special shortlist, no Cameron A list, no favoritism. Julia does it purely on merit. So a good... as well as representing the Southwest and Gibraltar, I have the honour to be the UKIP national spokesman on trade. Now, I'm not going to go through the entire length of my speech of yesterday, but I am going to restate 2 or 3 key points, and then I'm going to say something about flooding and then rail lines. So first of all, on trade. To get some facts into the discussion, exports to the European Union account for less than 10% of the UK's economy. In fact, the celebrated economist Roger Bootle on Wednesday put the figure at between 8 and 9%. However, 100% of our economy is subject to the burdens of EU regulation. And when we talk about trade, we should always bear in mind the glittering prize for UK exit, and that is to relieve 100% of our economy and the 95% of businesses that do not export to the EU at all from the burdens of EU regulation. And that alone is a very worthwhile aim. Now to trade. I'm going to come up with a revelation that for the Nick Clegg's, Peter Mendelssohn's, and Kenneth Clark's of British politics may be almost blinding. And here it is. The UK does not need to be in a political union in order to be able to trade. And here are 2 slides showing the top 40 countries from outside the EU and what it is that they export to people and businesses in the EU. And these figures are from Eurostat itself. They are, as it were, the very tablets from Mount Sinai. And here, at the bottom there, at number 40, is the United Arab Emirates, where many years ago I used to live and work. And you will see that even the UAE, at number 40, exported 8.3 billion euros worth of goods to the EU. And here is the slide showing numbers 1 to 20. And you will see the sheer volume of exports from these countries, none of them are EU members, who are not in the EU. And to drive the point still further, here is a simplified slide showing just the top 10. In 2012. Now, I'm just going to make 2 points. The first is this. China, at number 1, sold just short of 290 billion euros worth of goods to people and businesses in the EU. And China, Mr. Clegg, Mr. Mendelssohn, and Mr. Clark, is not in the EU political union. Second, the sheer volume of exports of the top 10 is worthy of note. It is, in fact, equivalent to the entire economy of Spain. Now, let us be crystal clear. a country does not have to be in a political union in order to trade. Not remotely, not at all. We would absolutely not be turning our backs on the EU markets when we leave the EU. That all trade would cease is not at all a tenable proposition. The facts are clear. This is complete rubbish, specious nonsense, and worse still, it is a deliberate deceit on the British electorate. In fact, there is no reason to suppose that any trade would be lost at all. Now, I'm going to go to the floods. Let me first show this clip, which I think is going to happen now. And the important point about this clip is that it was broadcast on March the 3rd, 2013, just about a year ago. It's 3.5 minutes.
After seeing their livelihoods devastated by months of severe flooding, they say the only solution is for the government to stump up £3 million to dredge 2 local rivers, which are causing the problem.
For years, people have been saying that you need to clear the silt clogging up the rivers if you want to stop flooding like we've seen recently from happening again. The Environment Agency now agrees that desilting, or dredging as it's also known, will help. But the scheme would cost £3 million, and it doesn't meet the right criteria to get funding. Campaigners say the current funding formula focuses cash on schemes that bring benefits to bigger population areas. So, for example, Exeter's flood defence scheme will cost £26 million, but the government estimates it will bring more than £200 million in benefits to the local economy. Such funding criteria means rural areas tend to lose out because fewer people live there.
There's been a large amount of money spent within the Parrett Drainage Board area on a managed salt marsh retreat, something upwards of 18 million, 20 million, something like that. If a small portion of that had been spent on dredging the rivers, we probably wouldn't be stood here today talking about the problems, because the problems wouldn't have been as great.
Should these farmers actually get the money they need?
Yes, and I would entirely endorse the gentleman in the film, Mr. Maltby, who advocated that the money that is being spent on creating artificial flooding in the Stark Peninsula, incidentally because of an EU directive, should be
first time you've got that in, I think,
should be allocated towards dredging these 2 rivers. One of which is the River Tone. I mean, that is what is logical. Governments hardly ever do logical things, but perhaps Oliver can use his good offices with the coalition government for them for once to do something logical. The fact of the matter is, and we see it there, the BBC described this problem very, very clearly a year ago, and I do want to pay tribute to BBC Southwest, who we sometimes criticise, and the Environment Agency knew that there was a problem years ago. Now, we in UKIP have put forward a 3-point plan, which I'll go through at lightning speed. First of all, there should be full and proper compensation paid to the people suffering from the flooding. This would be funded from a reduction in the increases in the aid budget, and there should also be contributions from the EU Solidarity Fund. Yeah. But this on the basis that there be no reduction, no cutback in the UK's rebate. Second, a public inquiry should be set up, and its terms of reference should include the impact of EU directives, specifically the EU directives on waste and the habitat, on the policies of the Environment Agency and the extent to which these policies have engendered the flooding. Thirdly, and this is the final piece of the plan, the Environment Agency be abolished. its conservation functions should be wrapped up into DEFRA, and its flood control functions should be put into a new National Rivers Authority, very similar to the National Rivers Authority that was abolished 10 years ago. Politicians are very bad, and quangocrats are very bad at taking responsibility. But in view of this special man-made disaster and the suffering which has engendered, we are also calling formally for 3 resignations. We first of all call for the resignation of Dan Rogerson MP, who, believe it or not, is the Minister for Floods. He seems to have lost his opportunity to impress his personality on the British people. The most invisible man of all. Secondly, Ed Davey, the Climate Change Secretary. Should resign. And we also call for the resignation of Chris Smith, or to give him his full and proper title, as a hereditary peer as I can, Lord Smith of Islington. And he should also resign, because throughout he's shown the leadership qualities of Winnie the Pooh.
Winnie the Pooh's a great leader.
The light is still green. I'm going to go through this at lightning speed. Some of you may have seen this. I think it's rather interesting. This is the railway lines that were here in Devon before 1939. Now, UKIP is the only party which is opposed to HSR2. And the point that I would make is that a tithe of what is being squandered on HSR2 on the basis of dodgy economic calculations could be spent to reinstate some of what was here in terms of railway lines before. Now, it's now 11:26. There's an amber light on. Ladies and gentlemen, you have not come here to hear me or even my terrific colleagues who we've heard from before. I am here primarily to introduce a caring and supportive colleague, a charismatic and eloquent speaker, an inspirational leader. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you the most dynamic politician in British public life today, Mr. Common Sense, Nigel Farage.